I never should have come here. That thought ran through my mind the moment I set foot on the desolate island where the lighthouse stood, its towering silhouette cutting against the gray sky like a silent, unblinking sentinel. The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying the scent of salt and decay, as if the ocean itself was warning me to turn back. But I had come too far to leave now. The journey had been grueling, an hour-long ferry ride to the nearest dock, followed by a smaller motorboat that cut through the choppy waters like a knife. My guide, an old fisherman named Ellis, had been reluctant to bring me here. "This place ain't right," he'd muttered, gripping the tiller with knotted fingers. "Folks see lights up there, but no one's lived in that lighthouse for decades. Something's wrong with it." I tried to dismiss his superstitions, but there was something in his voice, a quiet, desperate fear that unsettled me. The lighthouse, according to the research I had dug up, had been abandoned for nearly 60 years. Officially, it had been shut down after automation replaced human keepers, but the rumors suggested a darker story. Disappearances. Over the years, lighthouse keepers stationed here had vanished without a trace, their final log entries hinting at strange occurrences, whispers in the wind, unseen figures at the edge of the light, a creeping sense of being watched. Some believed the island was cursed. Others thought the keepers had gone mad. I had come to find the truth. Ellis refused to dock. "I'll wait offshore," he said. "Call me on the radio when you're ready to leave. But don't take too long." I barely had time to grab my gear before he motored away, leaving me alone with the wind and the towering structure before me. The lighthouse was massive, taller than I had expected. The white paint was chipped and peeling, revealing the rusting metal beneath. The glass of the beacon room was grimy, streaked with decades of neglect. And yet, despite its disuse, the place felt alive, like something was watching me. The main door was rusted shut, but a few hard kicks sent it groaning open. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten time. Dust motes swirled in the weak light filtering through the cracked windows, and the floorboards creaked beneath my weight. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The interior was exactly as I had imagined. Spiraling stairs leading up into the tower, rusted machinery lining the walls, and remnants of a life left behind. A wooden desk sat near the entrance, its surface covered in old logbooks and faded photographs. A coat, stiff with age, hung on a peg near the door. Whoever had last lived here had left in a hurry, or never left at all. I ran my fingers over the logbooks, flipping through yellowed pages filled with handwritten entries. Most of them were mundane records, weather reports, supply lists, mechanical checks. But then the handwriting changed. The last few entries were frantic, the ink smeared in places, as if written by a shaking hand. I hear it at night. The wind carries voices. I thought it was the waves at first, but it's not. It's whispering to me. The light flickered again today. I know I checked the generator, but it keeps dimming. Every time it does, I feel something closer. I swear I saw someone standing outside. No boat, no footprints. Just standing in the dark. Watching. The final entry sent a chill through me. The light must never go out. If it does, it will come for me. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and I nearly dropped the book. The sound was unnervingly like a whisper, low, distant, yet somehow right beside me. I turned sharply, my flashlight sweeping the room. The lighthouse was empty, but the feeling of being watched never faded. I swallowed hard and forced myself to take a deep breath. It was just an old logbook, just the wind. There's no one here but me. I spent the next hour exploring the lower levels. Most of it was storage, crates filled with rusted tools, long-expired food supplies, and old oil lamps. But something felt off. Objects were out of place, as if someone had been here recently. A chair sat pulled away from a small table, a mug beside it filled with something black and thick. I touched the rim, expecting dust, but my fingers came away wet. It was fresh. A noise from above made me freeze. Footsteps. I stared up the spiral staircase, heart hammering. The sound had been faint, but unmistakable. Someone or something was in the tower. I slowly reached for my flashlight, my fingers tightening around its handle. The smart thing to do would be to leave, call Ellis, and never look back. But I had come here for answers. Taking a steadying breath, I placed one foot on the first step, and then another, and another. As I climbed, the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying a whisper that sent ice through my veins. "You shouldn't be here." The spiral staircase groaned under my weight as I climbed higher into the tower. Every step sent a faint echo through the hollow structure, a reminder that I was alone. Or at least I should have been. But I wasn't. Something had moved above me. I had heard it. I paused, gripping the railing, my breath slow and measured. The wind outside howled against the lighthouse, rattling the glass panes, but the sound I had heard before, the footsteps, hadn't been the wind. I aimed my flashlight up the stairwell. The metal beams cast long, warped shadows against the walls, making it impossible to tell if something was lurking just out of sight. I forced myself to keep going. Each step took me closer to the top, where the beacon chamber waited. That was where the previous lighthouse keepers had written about the light flickering, about the strange occurrences they experienced before vanishing. As I ascended, the air grew colder. Not in the way an old structure might naturally feel, but in an unnatural, biting way, as if the tower itself was rejecting my presence. A new smell filled the space, thick and metallic. Rust, I thought at first. But as I reached the midway platform, my stomach twisted. It wasn't rust. It was something older, something wrong. Blood. I shined my flashlight across the small maintenance area, where the lighthouse keepers would have once taken breaks. There was an old wooden table covered in dust, a few forgotten coffee cups, and a leather-bound notebook left open. The pages were curled with age, but the ink was fresh, too fresh. I leaned in, my fingers trembling as I read the latest entry. The wind carries the voices. They whisper when the light is weak. They know my name. Last night I saw it. A figure in the glass. Watching me. Waiting. I cannot leave. The others tried. The others failed. The final entry was scrawled so violently that the paper had torn. The light must never go out. A deep shudder ran through me. The writing was identical to the frantic entries I had read downstairs. But this notebook was newer. It hadn't been abandoned for decades. Someone had been here recently. I snapped the book shut, swallowing hard. That meant one of two things. Either someone had been living here and had left in a hurry, or they hadn't left at all. The sound above me made my breath catch. Not a footstep this time. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I turned my flashlight toward the top of the staircase. The beacon chamber was just beyond those last few steps. The glass windows allowed the outside light to cast shifting patterns across the walls, but between them, something was wrong. A shadow moved where no shadow should be. I clenched my jaw and forced my feet forward. Each step creaked beneath me, but I had come too far to turn back. I reached the final landing and placed my hand against the metal door that led to the beacon room. The moment my fingers touched it, the whispering returned, faint, insistent, and coming from the other side of the door. I hesitated. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to turn back before it was too late. But something else, something deeper, compelled me to keep going. I pushed open the door. The beacon chamber was circular, lined with fogged-up glass panels. The giant light that once guided ships had long since been decommissioned. Its bulb shattered and its machinery rusted. But the room wasn't empty. At first, I didn't see it. My flashlight skimmed over empty chairs, overturned equipment, and broken radio transmitters. Then my light passed over the farthest corner of the room, and I saw it. A figure. It was tall, impossibly so. Its limbs stretched beyond natural proportions. Its skin, or what I could see of it, was a sickly gray, mottled, and wrinkled like something left in water for too long. And its eyes, or rather, where its eyes should have been, were nothing but hollow sockets. Yet I knew without a doubt that it could see me. The whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from the figure itself, but from the air around it, from the walls, from the very bones of the lighthouse. For a second, neither of us moved. Then it tilted its head, and the light in the chamber flickered just once. The second it did, the figure took a step forward. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. The air in the chamber thickened, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. The whispers became words. Faint, distorted, overlapping in a chorus of desperate voices. The light must never go out. It waits in the dark. Do not turn away. The figure took another step forward, its movement slow, deliberate. Its elongated fingers twitched, reaching for something unseen. And then the light flickered again. The moment the room dimmed, the figure lunged. I stumbled back, barely managing to avoid whatever unseen force had just surged toward me. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, reaching for my feet, clawing at the air. I fumbled for the light switch out of sheer instinct, my fingers scraping against rusted metal. The whispers turned into a scream, not a human sound, but something raw, ancient, and furious. The second I flipped the switch, the beacon flared back to life. Then the figure vanished. I stood there, heart hammering, my back pressed against the cold metal wall. The whispers had stopped. The shadows had receded, but the air was still thick with something unseen, something waiting. The light had saved me, but I realized, with a sinking horror, what the lighthouse keeper's log entries had meant. This wasn't just a lighthouse. It was a prison. The entity wasn't guiding lost sailors. It was trapped here. And if the light ever went out, it would be free. I stood frozen in the beacon chamber, my breath ragged, my pulse hammering in my ears. The light above me flickered weakly, casting long, jittering shadows across the room. The figure, that thing, was gone, but I could still feel its presence, lingering just beyond the edges of the glow. The lighthouse wasn't abandoned. Not in the way I had thought. Something was here. Something that was never meant to leave. And the light was the only thing keeping it at bay. I forced my legs to move, to take slow, deliberate steps back toward the spiral staircase. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of this cursed tower and never look back. But something else, something deeper, kept me anchored. The logbook. If there were answers anywhere in this place, they were in that book. I made my way back down the spiral staircase, gripping the rusted railing to keep my balance. The storm outside was worsening, the wind howling through the broken windows like a chorus of distant screams. When I reached the midway landing, I grabbed the leather-bound notebook from the dusty table and flipped it open, my fingers trembling as I scanned the handwritten entries. At first, the logs were mundane, just like the ones I had found downstairs. Records of daily tasks, weather reports, minor repairs. But then the tone changed. October 3rd, 1962. There's something wrong with the light. It flickered twice last night. I checked the generator. Nothing's wrong with it. But I have this feeling deep in my gut that I'm being watched. October 8th, 1962. I saw it. A figure in the glass when the light passed by. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but it was outside, standing on the balcony. But there's no way anyone could have gotten up there. No way. Not unless. The entry trailed off into frantic scribbles. My mouth went dry as I turned the page. The handwriting became more erratic, the words scrawled with shaking urgency. October 11th, 1962. The light keeps it away. That's all I know. If the light stays on, I'm safe. But when it flickers, when it dims, I hear it moving. Closer. Watching me. October 15th, 1962. I tried to leave today. Took the rowboat, made it halfway to shore. But the fog, God, the fog, it swallowed everything. I couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except the whispers. I turned back, and when I reached the shore, the lighthouse door was open, waiting for me. My hand shook as I flipped to the last entry. It was short, almost too simple. October 17th, 1962. The light must never go out. If it does, it will come for me. That was it. No explanation. No goodbye. And after that date, no record of the keeper ever leaving the lighthouse. A cold dread settled deep in my chest. He hadn't left. He had vanished. I gripped the notebook tighter, scanning the room as if expecting to see something standing just beyond my flashlight's beam. The lighthouse was silent, but the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me. Had the keeper been taken? Absorbed into the darkness? Had he become the thing I saw in the beacon? Or was he still here, trapped in shadows, waiting for the next fool to take his place? A sudden creaking noise made me snap my head toward the staircase. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming down from the beacon room above. I held my breath, every muscle in my body locking up as I pointed my flashlight toward the stairwell. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. The stairs were empty, and yet the sound continued. I backed away, my heart slamming against my ribs. I needed to leave. No. But as I turned toward the main door, I noticed something I hadn't before. Another door. It was half hidden behind a rusted metal cabinet, its frame warped from time. Unlike the rest of the lighthouse, which had been left to rot, this door had been reinforced. Heavy steel bolts lined its edges. Someone, maybe the last keeper, had sealed it shut. Whatever was behind that door, they had wanted it locked away forever. A sane person would have left it alone. But I had stopped being sane the moment I stepped onto this cursed island. I grabbed a rusted crowbar from a nearby workbench and wedged it into the doorframe, prying at the bolts. It took several forceful tugs before the old metal groaned and gave way, the door creaking open just enough for me to slip inside. The air was different here. Thick, stagnant, unmoving, like whatever was in this room had been waiting a very, very long time. My flashlight beam cut through the dust, revealing a small chamber lined with wooden crates and metal shelves. But my eyes were drawn immediately to the farthest wall, to the carvings. Deep jagged etchings covered the stone surface, stretching from floor to ceiling. Symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and eye-like shapes, repeated over and over again. Some were scratched so violently that the stone had cracked. And in the center, a message had been carved in large, uneven letters. The light holds it. Do not let it go dark. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a lighthouse. It was a prison. The light wasn't guiding lost sailors. It was keeping something locked away. And now I had seen it. Now it knew me. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, and my flashlight flickered. I turned, heart hammering, just in time to see the shadows shift. A figure stood in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my light, watching, waiting. And then the lighthouse light went out. The room was swallowed in blackness, and the whispers began again. The darkness was absolute. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The pitch black swallowed everything, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. My flashlight flickered, the weak beam sputtering against the walls, but it barely cut through the oppressive void. The whispers returned, not distant and scattered like before, but right next to me, soft, urgent, and then the worst sound of all, breathing. Not mine. Something else was in the room with me. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my grip, trying to catch even a glimpse of what lurked in the shadows. My pulse roared in my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Then movement. A shape, barely visible, shifting against the far wall. Tall, thin, raw. My fingers fumbled for the crowbar I had dropped, my muscles tensing as I backed toward the door. I needed to get out. No. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping into a desperate chorus. It sees you. The light must return. It is coming. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, the beam caught it. A figure, its body impossibly stretched, its limbs too long, too angular. Its skin, or whatever passed for it, was a sickly, translucent gray, shifting like smoke trapped in a human form. But its face, God, its face. Nothing but hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Yet I felt its gaze, heavy and suffocating, drilling into me. The lighthouse groaned, the very structure shaking around me as if the island itself was rejecting my presence. The thing in the dark took a slow step forward, its body barely making a sound despite its towering form. I scrambled backward, my shoulders slamming against the locked door. My hands flew to the handle, yanking and twisting, but the door wouldn't budge. No, I whispered, terror thick in my throat. Then, from the darkness, a hand. Long, bony fingers reached from the void, stretching toward my chest. I had seconds to react. With a surge of desperation, I raised the crowbar and swung blindly. The metal sliced through empty air, but the movement was enough. The thing recoiled, the whispering voices shrieking in my ears. Taking the moment, I twisted the door handle with all my strength. This time it gave way, and I stumbled out into the lighthouse hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. The whispering stopped. The room behind that door fell silent. But I knew it was still there. And worse, it knew I was here too. The lighthouse felt different now. Colder. As if something had shifted in the air. Something that had been dormant and waiting had finally begun to stir. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking hands as I braced against the door. Then another realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The beacon above, the only thing that had kept the entity at bay, was still out. I had to get it back on. I turned, sprinting toward the stairwell, taking the steps two at a time. My body protested with exhaustion, but adrenaline pushed me forward. As I climbed, the whispers followed. Fainter now, distant, like something stirring below, slowly waking up. I reached the top of the tower, bursting into the beacon chamber. The lantern room was dark, the massive light sitting still and lifeless. The wind screamed through the broken windows, and in the glass reflection, I saw it. A shadow, standing in the far corner of the room, watching me. I spun around, but the space was empty. The shadow was gone. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I turned my focus to the beacon. The control panel was rusted, the switches corroded from years of salt air. I yanked at the ignition, willing the ancient mechanism to turn on. Nothing. I tried again, my fingers slipping on the cold metal. The wind howled around me, the whispers growing stronger, slithering into my ears like insidious promises. You let it out. The light is broken. It is free. Panic clawed at my throat. I had to relight the beacon. I had to. Frantically, I searched for an emergency power switch. My flashlight skimmed over old schematics on the wall, detailing the original electrical system. Then I saw it. A manual ignition system buried beneath the main control panel. I dropped to my knees, tearing away rusted panels and frayed wires. My fingers found the crank handle, stiff from years of neglect. I had to do this fast, because I wasn't alone up here. The shadows in the room moved, not the kind cast by objects, but something independent, liquid black tendrils creeping along the floor, stretching toward me. I gritted my teeth, gripping the crank handle. The whispers turned into an urgent hiss. Stop. Let it out. Finish what was started. The shadows surged forward. I cranked the ignition. The lights sputtered, the old generator groaning to life. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The shadows swarmed closer, an overwhelming, suffocating void reaching for my ankles. Then, with a deafening hum, the beacon roared back to life. A powerful golden beam cut through the darkness, flooding the chamber with light. The second it did, the shadows screamed. Not in pain, in rage. The dark tendrils recoiled, slithering back into the cracks and corners of the lighthouse. The whispers turned into a frenzied cacophony before fading into the wind. I collapsed against the wall, my chest heaving. The beacon was back on. The entity was trapped again. But I knew now that the lighthouse wasn't abandoned. It was never abandoned. It was watching. It was waiting. And if the light ever failed again, God help whoever found themselves here next. The beacon's hum filled the lighthouse, vibrating through the walls, pulsing like a heartbeat. The oppressive darkness had retreated, for now. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was gone. The entity was still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The light had saved me. That much was clear. But the whispers, the unnatural presence, the warnings in the logbooks, it all pointed to something deeper, something buried in this place. And I needed to find it. I descended the spiral staircase, my footsteps echoing in the dimly lit tower. My flashlight beam flickered against the rusted walls, catching glimpses of old tools, crates, and remnants of a time long past. The air was heavier down here, thicker. It wasn't just dust or decay. It was wrong. Something was beneath this lighthouse. Something they had tried to lock away. And I was going to find it. I retraced my steps to the door I had forced open earlier, the one hidden behind the metal cabinet. The carvings inside that room had haunted me since I first saw them. Symbols I didn't recognize. A message scratched violently into the stone. The light holds it. Do not let it go dark. The words swam in my mind as I stepped inside again. The air in the chamber was stagnant, untouched by time. This was different from the rest of the lighthouse, more than just forgotten. It had been sealed. For a reason. I ran my fingers along the wall, feeling the deep grooves of the carvings. Whoever made these had done so in desperation. Some of the symbols had been scratched so violently that the stone had crumbled, as if the person carving them had been in a frenzy. My flashlight beam settled on a section of the floor where the dust was disturbed. Something had been moved here recently. I knelt down, brushing away the loose debris, revealing a rusted metal handle embedded in the ground. A hatch. My stomach twisted. This was it. The hidden part of the lighthouse. The part no one was supposed to find. I hesitated, every rational part of my brain screaming at me to turn back. But I had come too far. I needed to know. I gripped the handle and pulled. At first, the hatch refused to budge, rusted shut from years of neglect. But with a final heave, the metal groaned, and the door wrenched open, revealing a set of stone steps leading into pure blackness. A thick, musty scent wafted up from below. Damp stone, rotting wood, and something older. Something I couldn't quite name. The light from the beacon above barely reached this far. The steps vanished into the abyss, the darkness at the bottom unnatural, too deep. I shined my flashlight downward, the beam swallowed up as if the blackness itself was hungry. A cold dread settled in my chest. This wasn't just a storage room or an old cellar. This was something else. I took the first step. The air grew colder. My skin prickled with static, like the very walls were charged with unseen energy. I kept going, my breathing shallow, my flashlight flickering slightly as I descended. The deeper I went, the more the whispers returned, no longer from the wind, but from the very walls. You shouldn't be here. It waits below. Turn back before it sees you. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The stairs ended at a narrow hallway, carved directly into the bedrock of the island. The walls were lined with more of the strange symbols, but these were different. They pulsed, almost as if they were breathing. Ahead of me, an old wooden door stood slightly ajar, its hinges warped with age. I reached out and pushed it open. The room beyond was small and circular, like a ritual chamber. The stone walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of them, spirals, eyes, figures reaching towards something unseen. And in the center of the room stood a pedestal. On the pedestal sat an oil lantern, old but intact. The moment my flashlight beam touched it, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The lantern was different from the rest of the lighthouse's equipment. This was something older, something that didn't belong here. And then I saw the inscription etched into its base. The first light. Realization crashed over me. This was the lighthouse's first light, not the electrical beacon above. This oil lantern was what originally kept the island illuminated before modern technology. And somehow it was still here, preserved, waiting. A deep, heavy pressure settled in my chest. The last lighthouse keeper had written, "The light must never go out." What if they hadn't been talking about the beacon upstairs? I reached out hesitant, my fingers brushing the lantern's metal surface. It was warm. I recoiled, my pulse spiking. It shouldn't have been warm. It had been down here for decades, untouched. Unless it had never actually gone out. I swallowed hard. The lantern was still burning, but I couldn't see its flame. That's when I noticed the walls. And my breath stopped. The carvings had changed. The spirals were moving. The eye symbols blinked. And the figures, the reaching figures, were now facing me. The whispers returned, one voice louder than the rest. A voice that wasn't human. "Do not take the light." A chill ran down my spine. The voice wasn't just inside my head, it was here, in the room with me. I spun around, flashlight trembling, but I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Then I saw it. In the farthest corner of the chamber, where the light barely touched, a figure stood, tall, twisted, hollow eyes burning, waiting. My breath caught in my throat. The thing hadn't moved. It wasn't charging at me. It wasn't whispering. It was just standing there, watching. The light from my flashlight flickered against its form, but it didn't disappear this time. Because this wasn't a shadow. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was real. And it was getting closer. Couldn't move. The figure in the corner of the chamber wasn't fading. It wasn't shifting like a trick of the light. It was real, a towering shape of withered flesh, elongated limbs, and hollow, unblinking sockets where its eyes should have been. The whispers in the walls grew louder, but this time, they weren't warning me. They were chanting. The light must not go out. Do not let it leave. Keep the first light burning. But I wasn't sure if they were speaking to me or to it. My hands trembled as I took a slow step backward, my flashlight flickering in my grip. The thing in the shadows moved. Not like a person, not like something with bones and muscle. It glided, its feet never touching the ground, its body bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. The whispers twisted, turning urgent. Keep the light on. Keep the light on. Keep the light on. I reached out, my fingers closing around the lantern on the pedestal. The second my hand touched it, the room lurched. The walls shuddered, the symbols warped, and the wind rushed through the tunnel behind me. But the air down here had been still. There shouldn't have been any wind. But there was now. Because something had just woken up. I turned toward the stairwell, but the passage was gone. Instead, a black void stretched before me. The stairs had vanished, replaced by an endless tunnel of swirling darkness. And inside it, something was moving. The whispers screamed, "Do not turn around. Do not look at it. Keep the light on." But I had already turned, and I saw it. A shape inside the void. No, 1,000 shapes. Figures, tangled and writhing together in the dark, clawing at each other, clawing at the air, their hollow mouths open in silent, soundless screams. I staggered back, my breath catching. They weren't alive. They weren't dead either. They were trapped. And I knew without a doubt, if the light ever truly went out, I would be one of them. A gust of wind slammed into me, knocking me against the pedestal. The lantern shook, its warm glow flickering. The figure in the room, the one watching me, twitched. Its limbs spasmed, its body jerking toward me in a sudden, unnatural lurch. The second the light dimmed, it got closer. I grabbed the lantern, holding it up between us. The whispers roared, "Do not drop it. Do not let it go out. Run." I ran. I didn't know where I was going. The stairwell had vanished. The walls were closing in, and the air was thick with something unseen. But I ran anyway. Behind me, the thing followed. No footsteps, no breath, just the endless pull of its presence, like gravity itself had twisted toward me. The voices in the walls fought against it, shrieking words I barely understood. It must not leave. Keep it here. Keep the light on. A doorway appeared ahead. Not the stone hatch I had entered through. This was different. A wooden door, old and warped with age, standing alone in the swirling void. The voices changed. Close the door. Trap it inside. Shut the door. Shut the door. I threw myself toward it, lantern clutched to my chest, and slammed my body against the wood. The whispers wailed. The entity behind me lurched forward, reaching. I yanked the door shut. Silence. The wind died. The shadows vanished. I was on the other side. I gasped for breath, my body trembling, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. I turned, expecting to see stone walls, the lighthouse interior, anything normal. But I wasn't in the lighthouse anymore. I was standing on the cliffside, just outside the tower. The storm had passed. The ocean stretched before me, vast and endless, silent beneath the moonlight. The lighthouse beacon hummed steadily behind me, its golden light piercing the night. The door I had stepped through, gone. I looked down at my hands. The lantern was still there, still warm, still glowing, but dim now. Not out, not yet. I turned toward the lighthouse, my breath still shaky, my mind racing with everything I had just seen. The door, the symbols, the figures in the dark. Had I sealed it back inside? Had I escaped? Or had I just become part of the cycle? I lifted the lantern, watching its light flicker weakly in the night air. And then, from somewhere deep inside the lighthouse, I heard it. The soft, distant sound of a door creaking open. The door was gone. The lighthouse stood behind me, its towering form cutting through the night, the beacon casting long streaks of golden light across the waves. And yet, somewhere inside, I had heard it. The door creaking open. I swallowed hard, gripping the lantern as if it were the only thing tethering me to reality. The whispers had stopped. The wind had died, but something about the silence felt worse. The lighthouse was watching me, not in the way a building might loom, casting its shadow over the cliffs. No, this was different. Intelligent. Aware. The same way it had watched me in the basement. I took a step forward, my boots crunching against the damp stone. The air smelled of salt and something else, something old, like forgotten dust in a sealed-off tomb. I had to go back inside. Not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. I stepped through the main entrance, my lantern casting long, flickering shadows against the rusted walls. The air was thicker now, charged with a static hum that prickled against my skin. Something had changed. Something had followed me back. I climbed the spiral staircase once more, each step groaning beneath my weight. The beacon chamber awaited me at the top, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. As I reached the final landing, the whispering returned. Soft, gentle, not in the walls, not from the wind, but from the beacon itself. I stepped inside the chamber, my breath catching in my throat. The light was still spinning, casting its golden glow across the ocean. But as the beam rotated, it revealed something standing inside the glass enclosure. Something tall. Something wrong. I froze. The figure stood in the center of the beacon's glow, its elongated body stretching toward the ceiling. Its skin was the color of fog, translucent and shifting, like it wasn't fully solid. And its face. It had no eyes, no mouth, no features, just a hollow void where its face should have been. But somehow I felt its gaze. It was looking right at me. The whispers grew louder. You brought it back. It knows your name. Do not let the light go out. The figure moved. Not a step, not a shift. It was as if it was suddenly closer, without ever having moved. I gripped the lantern tighter, my pulse roaring in my ears. The beacon light passed over the figure again, and this time its face had changed. Two empty sockets stared back at me. No eyes, no soul, just the impression of a human face, forming where before there had been nothing. It was mimicking me, learning me, taking something from me. I stumbled backward, my shoulders slamming against the wall. The whispers twisted into something else, a single hollow voice, layered over itself in a chorus of echoes. Why did you bring me here? My breath hitched. I hadn't spoken. The voice was mine. It had repeated my thoughts back to me, as if pulling them from my mind. You let me out. You must finish it. The light must never go out. I didn't know what would happen if the beacon failed. I didn't want to know. But I could feel it. The thing inside the light wasn't trapped anymore. It was waiting. And I had a terrible feeling that if the light stopped spinning, if the beam of gold stopped touching the ocean, it would finally step into this world completely. I had to do something. I forced my legs to move, stepping toward the control panel. The light was powered now, but it was old. I needed to make sure it stayed on. The moment I moved, the figure shifted. Instantly, it was beside me. Its head tilted toward mine, and for the first time, I saw its mouth. It hadn't been there before. Now it was. A long, twisted grin stretched across its face, and it whispered in my voice, "Do you want to see what happens if the light goes out?" My fingers flew over the controls, turning every switch I could find. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't care. I just knew that if that thing was offering me a choice, I needed to do the opposite. The beacon flared, its golden glow intensifying, and for the first time, the figure recoiled. It hated the light. The whispers screamed, a deafening, chaotic roar. The figure twisted, its grin warping into something monstrous, its hollow socket stretching unnaturally. The entire lighthouse shook. The glass panels rattled, and in the reflection I saw them. Hundreds of hollow figures, flickering in and out of the light. Not solid. Not here, but waiting. The figure raised one long, bony finger toward me. The light flickered, just for a second. But in that second, it moved again. It was right in front of me. The whispers pleaded, "Do not let the light go out. Do not look away. Do not listen to it." The figure's face twisted. It opened its mouth wider, too wide, as if its skin was stretching beyond what should be possible. And in the depths of its hollow throat, I saw the void. It was empty, and it wanted to pull me in. The light flared one last time, and the figure screamed. It disappeared. Not faded. Not dissolved. Just vanished, like it had never been there at all. The whispers stopped. The shadows fled. And the light? It stayed on. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. The air felt different now. The lighthouse was still watching me. But the thing inside the beacon, it was gone. For now. But the voices had told me the truth all along. The light must never go out, because if it did, it would come back. And next time, I might not escape. The hum of the beacon filled the chamber, steady and unwavering. The thing inside the light, the watcher, was gone. Or at least, it had retreated. But I knew better than to believe it was over. I slumped against the cold metal wall, my breath ragged. My hands trembled around the lantern I had taken from the basement. It was still warm, still glowing faintly. The whispers had stopped. The air felt lighter. But the lighthouse wasn't empty. Not entirely. I needed answers. The journal I had found earlier, the one left behind by the last known keeper, hadn't told the whole story. Something had happened here long before the government abandoned the lighthouse. The carvings, the warnings, the ritualistic symbols hidden beneath the foundation. This place hadn't been built just to guide ships. It had been built to contain something. And the men who had kept this place running, they were either dead or trapped inside it. I made my way down the spiral staircase, my footsteps echoing in the hollow structure. The wind outside had died to a whisper, and the night was too still, the kind of stillness that made my stomach churn. Something was waiting. Something wasn't finished yet. I reached the keeper's quarters on the second level, a small, dimly lit room filled with relics of another era. Rusted tools, half-empty oil cans, a single chair pulled away from an old wooden desk, and more logbooks. Some older than the one I had found upstairs. I hesitated, my fingers brushing over the cracked leather spines. The government had decommissioned the lighthouse in the 1960s. But these journals? They went back much further. I flipped through the earliest entry I could find, my pulse quickening as I scanned the uneven script. November 12, 1891. We were not told everything when we were assigned this post. The previous keepers left without a word. No records. No explanations. We should have questioned why. December 3rd, 1891. Strange things happen when the light flickers. We hear voices in the wind. Shapes move beyond the glass. At first, we thought it was exhaustion, the isolation playing tricks on us. But now we know better. December 15th, 1891. Wilkes is gone. He said he was leaving, taking the rowboat to the mainland. The storm wasn't bad that night. The waters were calm, but he never arrived. January 2nd, 1892. The light is changing. I feel something watching me from within it. When I sleep, I dream of the beacon room, of the light going out. I wake up gasping, convinced something is standing over me. But when I open my eyes, I'm always alone. Always. My breath hitched. I knew that feeling. I had felt it myself. The sensation of being watched. The creeping dread in the air when the light flickered. These keepers, they had seen it too. And one by one, they had disappeared. I flipped ahead, scanning for the final entry. March 9th, 1892. There are only 2 of us left. Dorian tried to leave last night. He walked down the stairs, past the lower level. The writing became frantic, erratic, as if the writer's hand had been shaking. He never made it outside. I called his name, but when I went down to look, the hallway was wrong. Longer than before. Twisting. And when I turned back, the stairs were gone. I am alone now. The light must never go out. If it does, it will take me too. The entry ended there. No name. No explanation. Just silence. I flipped through the remaining pages, but they were blank. As if the writer had vanished before he could finish the next entry. I let the book slip from my fingers, my body numb. The keepers hadn't abandoned this place. They had been consumed by it. The lighthouse had taken them. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, and my breath froze in my chest. No. I hadn't left the door open. Something had moved it. Something was in here with me. I turned slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. The small room was empty. No shadows, no movement. But the air felt different. Colder. And then I saw it. A single footprint in the dust. Not mine. Leading deeper into the lighthouse. My heart slammed against my ribs. The air shifted, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. A whisper low, nearly imperceptible, curled around the edges of the room. It took them. It will take you too. Unless you finish it. I didn't understand what that meant. Finish what? Was this the cycle the keepers had been trapped in? Was the entity inside the light simply waiting for the next fool to take their place? Or was I already part of it? I stepped back toward the staircase, my every instinct screaming at me to get out. But before I could move, the lantern in my hands flickered. And in the reflection of the lighthouse window, I saw them. The missing keepers. Their faces were hollow, their bodies twisted, and they were standing right behind me. The whispers rose into a deafening roar. The air turned ice cold, and the light above me flickered just for a second. But in that second, I knew I had one chance to stop this, one chance to break the cycle, or I would never leave this place. The moment the light flickered, the room shifted. Not just the air, the entire space warped, like reality itself had bent at the edges. The lighthouse wasn't the same anymore. The wooden floor beneath me stretched too far, the walls curved wrong, and the spiral staircase that should have led back to the beacon chamber was missing. And behind me, they were still there. The lighthouse keepers, or what was left of them, stood in the reflection of the window. Their faces were half-formed, blurred like unfinished sketches. Their mouths moved soundlessly, their hollow eyes locked onto mine. And then one of them stepped forward. Not in the reflection. In the room with me. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. For a second, I saw it clearly. A man. No, the ghost of a man. His uniform was tattered, his skin pale and stretched too thin over his bones. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Not at first. Then, in a voice layered over itself, distorted and broken, he spoke. It needs a keeper. The light must not fail. It waits in the dark. A wave of nausea rolled over me. The lighthouse had never been a guiding beacon for lost sailors. It was a prison. The keepers weren't just disappearing, they were being taken. Trapped inside the walls, inside the whispers, inside the light itself. I stumbled back, gripping the lantern tighter. The ghostly figure twitched, its mouth stretching into a grimace as if it were fighting something unseen. Then, with a sudden jolt, the whispers screamed around me, and the shadows in the room moved. Not just flickering, they reached for me. I ran. I didn't know where. The lighthouse was changing around me, the hallways stretching and twisting like a living thing. The walls shuddered, the old wooden beams creaked and moaned, and in the distance, I heard something dragging itself closer. Not footsteps. Something worse. Something that had been waiting for this moment. I reached what should have been the staircase leading back to the beacon, but instead, I found another door. Not like the others. This one was carved into the stone, its frame lined with symbols, the same ones I had seen in the hidden chamber below. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me not to open it. But behind me, the whispers changed. They were no longer telling me to run. They were pleading. It must end. Break the cycle. You cannot leave unless you finish it. I grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. The air inside was thick, suffocating, as if I had stepped into a space that had been sealed for centuries. A single beam of light shone from the ceiling, illuminating the center of the room. And in that light, a chair. An old wooden chair, identical to the one I had seen in the old photographs of past keepers. Identical to the one I had seen in the logbooks, in the basement, in the beacon chamber itself. The moment I stepped inside, the whispers stopped. A new voice spoke instead. A voice I recognized. My own. Sit. My heart slammed against my ribs. No, this was wrong. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to take the chair. But as I turned to run, the door behind me slammed shut. The shadows closed in, twisting at the edges of the light, forming something else. Something I had seen before. The figure from the beacon stepped forward. It wasn't moving toward me. It was moving toward the chair. As it reached the center of the room, it stopped, tilting its head slowly. It raised one long, bony hand, pointing at the empty seat. The voice came again. It must be kept. The light must not go out. Sit. I shook my head, backing away. No, I whispered. I'm not part of this. I didn't ask for this. The figure twitched, its mouth stretching into a sickening grin. You were chosen the moment you stepped inside. The shadows pressed closer, wrapping around the chair like living tendrils. Sit. I tried to fight it. I tried to resist. But the lighthouse, the entity inside it, was stronger. I felt my body pulled forward, my movements no longer my own. The chair was waiting. The keepers had all sat before me. And I knew with sickening certainty what happened to them after they did. They became part of the lighthouse. Part of it. The thing in the beacon. The watchers. The light above me flickered, and for a brief second, I saw them all. The past keepers. Their faces twisted, their bodies broken, their hollow eyes locked onto mine. And then, I broke free. I screamed and threw the lantern onto the chair. The second it touched the wood, the entire room erupted in golden fire. The entity screamed, a sound that shook the very foundations of the lighthouse. The walls shuddered, the symbols burned away, and the figures vanished in a flash of blinding light. And then, everything collapsed. The next thing I knew, I was outside, standing on the rocky cliffside. The lighthouse was burning. The golden light from the beacon faded, replaced by roaring red flames. The shadows inside were gone. The whispers were gone. And in the distance, as the last of the lighthouse crumbled into the sea, I heard it. A single, final whisper, carried by the wind. You broke it. You are free. The lighthouse was burning. Thick black smoke curled into the sky, twisting like spectral fingers reaching toward the heavens. The beacon, the thing that had kept the entity contained for decades, maybe centuries, was gone. And for the first time, the island was silent. No whispers, no voices in the wind, no shadow lurking just beyond the light. But I wasn't safe yet. I stood frozen on the cliffside, watching the flames consume the structure. The heat pressed against my skin, mixing with a cold ocean breeze, but I couldn't look away. I half expected something to emerge from the fire, some final horror, some last remnant of the entity, clawing its way out to drag me back. But nothing came. Whatever had been inside the lighthouse was gone. Or at least, I hoped it was. Then a sound, a distant, faint humming, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder. Not the whispers, not the wind. A boat engine. I spun around, my heart pounding. Through the thick mist rolling in from the sea, I saw a light cutting through the fog, small, distant, but unmistakable. Ellis, the fisherman who had brought me here. He had actually come back for me. I ran toward the shoreline, stumbling over jagged rocks and uneven ground. My body ached, exhaustion settling into my bones, but I kept moving. I wasn't going to die here. Not after everything I had seen. Not after everything I had survived. As I reached the water's edge, Ellis' boat drifted closer, a small craft bouncing against the waves. I saw him standing at the bow, his weathered face twisted with worry. What the hell happened up there? He shouted over the roar of the ocean. I turned back, looking at the burning lighthouse one last time. The flames reflected in the water, turning the waves an eerie shade of gold. It's over, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. Ellis reached out, gripping my arm as I hauled myself onto the boat. My entire body felt like it was running on empty, bruised, battered, but somehow still standing. You look like you saw a ghost, kid, he muttered, steering the boat away from the island. I let out a shaky breath, staring back at the lighthouse as it crumbled into the sea. I think I saw worse than that, I murmured. Ellis shot me a look, but he didn't press for details. Maybe he had his own stories about that place. Maybe he already knew. We rode in silence across the waves, the mist swallowing the island behind us. The further we got, the lighter the air felt. Like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally lifted. I closed my eyes, letting the rocking of the boat lull me into something close to peace. But then, something cold coiled around my spine. An instinct, a feeling. And before I even turned my head, I knew what I would see. I looked back at the island, at the burning remains of the lighthouse, at the water beneath it, and in the reflection of the waves, a light, faint, flickering, but still there. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. The beacon was gone. The fire had destroyed everything. But the light, the first light, the true light, hadn't been in the beacon at all. It had been below the lighthouse, deep beneath the island. Still burning, still waiting. The whispers returned, soft, distant, carried by the wind. The light must never go out. The keeper must return. The cycle never ends. I tore my gaze away, forcing myself to face forward. I didn't tell Ellis what I had seen. Didn't tell him that it was still there, because I knew he wouldn't believe me. And even if he did, some things are better left buried. I left the island behind. I left the lighthouse behind, but as the boat cut through the dark waves, I knew one thing for certain. The light wasn't finished with me. And one day, no matter how far I ran, it will call me back.